I've decided to create a design to hand pollinate flowers. My design is based on the back of legs of a bee. Each bristle on the brush is meant to mimic the pollen rake and pollen brush features of the bee. The brush will be made out of a biopolymer known as chitin, which is what the exoskeleton of a bee is made out of. Inside the brush, there will be a small motor meant to mimic the buzzing of bees, which will be important to help get the pollen out of the flower and onto the brush. The vibration will be very weak in order not to damage the flower. My design is meant to mimic the back leg of a bee, where most of the pollen collection happens. You can see the pollen basket pointed out on the diagram right here, which is something I'm not including in my design because I'm not needing to bring pollen to a nest to get processed. But what is included is this feature on the legs, the strand known as the pollen rake or the pollen brush, and this is what's used to get the pollen off the flower and onto the bee. The main people who will benefit from my design will be indoor gardeners and gardeners who have small outdoor plots. Pollinators can't get inside to work on your flowers if you're gardening indoors, and outdoors sometimes the bees there are very few of them, or they won't always visit your garden, which is why it's important to have a way to pollinate yourself. Currently, there are two methods that gardeners use to hand pollinate flowers. The first one is called tickling, which involves rubbing a flower onto another flower. This can cause damage to the flower, especially if you have to rip off the other flower. This damage is not very good for the plant. The second method is by using a paintbrush, which is where my design kind of comes from. The paintbrush, especially if it has rough bristles, can damage the reproductive parts of the flower, which will lead to a lower yield of fruit. And then in both ways, they are kind of insufficient at pollinating because you have not very much control over where the pollen goes on the flower. And that's the end. Thank you for listening to my presentation.